So when we look at the whole story of this rock, this split rock, it's where God stood before Israel, where water came out, where they could drink of it. But not only that, but he delivered them from a great conflict that took place in this valley. It's the Battle of the Amalekites. Now in chapter 18, we read about Jethro being priest of Midian. He's obviously close by. He's about 15, 16 miles away in modern-day Albad. He hears about everything that was done, and he decides to travel out to meet Moses and the people. In chapter 18, that takes place. In chapter 19 of the Exodus, we read about theophany at Sinai. And it says this: in the 3rd month after Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, the same day they arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. They traveled from Rephidim, came into the wilderness of Sinai, and set camp in the wilderness. Israel camped there right in front of the mountain. So this is describing the journey from Rephidim around to the wilderness of Sinai and camping in front of the mountain. And then it says, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, say this to the house of Jacob, and tell Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings, how I brought you to myself. Now then, if you listen closely to my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my own treasure from among all people, for all the earth is mine. So as for you, you will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. As we entered into the region of Sinai, we were just awestruck at the magnitude of the place. The mountains are really high. The desolation is absolute. There is very little around there. There's a couple Bedouins that live at the base of the mountain that have lived there for generations, but as a whole, it is left untouched. It is left unspoiled. We read in verse 4, so Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord, rose up early in the morning, and built an altar below the mountain, along with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He then sent out young men of Israel who sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. Now, if you read this, you can understand the significance of this spot. One of the things that you should see at Mount Sinai is an altar, and we do just that. We find an altar, a high place with chutes for animals to go in. Not only that, but we also see where 12 cut stones were once seen. We see 9 of them today, but they're of different heights, and they look like columns. I've been to many places and seen columns sections, and these are definitely column sections. So we have evidence for columns, and we see the evidence of the altar that is still there. Saudis have excavated it, and they found animal bones and they found ash, exactly matching the biblical description of this mountain. It is at this place that Israel first made covenant with the Lord in sacrificing burnt offerings. And we read here, continuing in verse 6 of chapter 24, then Moses took half the blood and put it in the basins, and the other half he poured out against the altar. He took the scroll of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. Again they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do and obey. Then Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold the blood of the covenant which the Lord has cut with you in agreement with all these words. Then Moses and the priests and 70 elders of Israel went up. They saw the God of Israel, and under his feet was something like a pavement of sapphire, as clear as the very heavens. Yet he did not raise his hand against the nobles of Israel, so they beheld God and ate and drank. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and stay there, and I will give you tablets of stone with the Torah, which is the 10 Commandments, as well as the other commandments, which I have written so that you may instruct them. So Moses rose up along with his attendant Joshua, and Moses went up onto the mountain of God. To the elders he said, "Wait for us here until we come back to see you." Moses goes into the mountain of God, and he's lost up there after the covenant. Israel thinks that something has taken place. As Moses is receiving the instructions, receive all the examples, the things of the tabernacle and how to live in covenant relationship with God. And we read all these things, and God goes through step by step everything that they are to make. But down below, the people are getting restless. They're thinking Moses has disappeared. Now, at this time, Israel was really a slave population. They had lived in Egypt for 400 years in slavery. And when Moses disappeared in the mountain to receive the commandments of God, they were concerned. They didn't know what happened. I'm standing here at the base of Jebel Makla, on the whole Laz or Luz range in Saudi Arabia. And behind me you see the valley with the altar in this direction. And also up the mountain you can see where it's thought perhaps Elijah's cave is at. The children of Israel had been at Sinai for some days. After the cutting of the covenant at the altar, the Bible accounts a story when Moses went up into the mountains for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving the instruction of God. At the base of the mountain, there was a disruption. They didn't realize that Moses would be gone so long, and they wondered why it was taking him so long. And in chapter 32, we read the account of the golden calf. And it says this: "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said to him, 'Get up, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man that brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him.' So Aaron said to them, 'Break off the golden rings that are in your ears of your wives, sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me.' So all the people broke off the rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He received them from their hand and made a molten calf fashioned with a chiseling tool. Then they said, 'This is your God, Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' When Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. Then Aaron made a proclamation, saying, 'Tomorrow will be a feast to the Lord.' They rose up early, and the next morning sacrificed burnt offerings and brought fellowship offerings. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play." If you would be a part of the greatest story in the Bible, the Exodus, you'd think that after you had seen the sea split, that you would see the army of Pharaoh destroyed, that you would be faithful to this God who was in the pillar of fire at night and also the cloud by day leading you. But we read in Exodus 32 how the children of Israel were still learning to be obedient to the Lord. After Moses was in the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, Israel was thinking that Moses disappeared. And so they instructed and asked Aaron to build for themselves a god, somebody they could worship. Aaron follows the instruction of the people and he builds them a golden calf. And we read in the Bible that he builds this, and there's this bull worship going on. In Egypt, there's Apis and Hathor bulls, and Israel would have known about the worship of Apis and Hathor. And so Aaron builds this god for them, and they worship, they sacrifice to it, and they say, well, this is the God that has delivered us. And it's at that moment that God tells Moses to come down to his people, and to because of the corruption that was going on, that they were committing truly idolatry. And so Moses comes down and he throws the tablets that God had given them and destroys them, and he deals with Israel at this mountain. If this is truly Mount Sinai, then it would make sense that we actually find a pile of stone with inscriptions of Apis and Hathor bulls, something that dates back literally thousands of years, in a region where there is no cattle. There's no cows in the region of Sinai. it's too desolate and arid, but yet there we find inscriptions of cattle at the base of this mountain, where there is also an altar of uncut stones, just as the Bible describes, and where the glory of the Lord came, and where the covenant was made with the house of Israel.
We're standing here at the Golden Calf altar site, and behind me you see the rocks where we found where the petroglyphs have been